Good everyone, and welcome to the Transition Learning Community. We're always pleased when you're a part of the discussion with us. I'm Gwen White, and I'm one of your co-facilitators. I'm going to initially turn this over to Gary, who's our IT specialist, and will tell us a little bit about the network.
Certainly. So just a little bit about the webinar today. I know many of you have participated in past webinars that the TA Network has put on. We encourage folks to introduce themselves in the chat feature, which you should be seeing on the right-hand side of your screen. That's also where we'll have you put comments and questions during the presentation, and depending on how many callers we get in a little bit later, when we open up for discussion, we may go ahead and unmute phone lines. They're currently muted to avoid any sort of audio issues. And if you dial in, which is the best audio for the webinars, go ahead and check how to dial in the chat box at the very top. It gives you the number and the participant code. And then if you hear an echo effect, you will need to mute your computer speakers. You'll still have audio through your phone, and that will get rid of the echo effect. Below the chat box are the slides from today that you can download, as well as some resources and documents by clicking on the title of the document and then clicking the button at the bottom that says Download File. And finally, a little later on towards the end, we're going to be having Gwen, Alice, and Lauren on the webcams, and you'll see that above the PowerPoint when we move to that section. All right, back to you, Gwen.
Thank you, Gary. So we're going to move ahead, and this is jointly hosted by the Now is the Time Healthy Transitions TA Center and the National Training and Technical Assistance Center, the TA Network. And we're very interested in who is here today. I'm Gwen White from the Healthy Transitions TA Center and have the privilege of co-facilitating the learning community with Johanna. We appreciate if you would type into the chat box and tell us who you are. While I welcome you to this, our fourth convening of the learning community, we're here and have been here because we are dedicated to improving the lives of young adults, hopefully by transforming the services and systems which support them. As I mentioned, I'm privileged to co-facilitate this with Johanna Bergen, and I'm going to turn it over to Johanna.
Thanks, Gwen. I'm so glad to be here as well. So again, my name's Johanna Bergen, and with Youth Move National, and a proud partner with both of the TA centers co-hosting today. In addition to sharing your name and role in the chat box, we'd like to know a little bit more about the organization that you work for and that the role you hold in that organization. So there will be 2 polls up for you over the course of the next couple of minutes. The poll at the top of the screen describes your organization that you're representing today, and the poll in the lower part of your screen is the role you hold within that organization. This gives us an opportunity as presenters to learn a little bit more about who we're talking to today, and helps us have an overall picture of who's been engaging throughout the Transitions Learning community. Great, and folks are still logging in and joining us now, so welcome. We're learning a little bit more about our participants through these 2 polling questions, and asking that you introduce yourself by name and location in the public chat box. All right, great. So we have a strong representation of state and local mental health agencies, as well as others on the line, and we hold a diverse set of roles within these organizations. Okay, great. One of the things that we strive to do in this learning community is make connections with each other. So throughout the chat box and through our participant discussion, we hope to learn from each of you and the roles and hats that you play. each session that we've convened, we've heard from a various number of individuals and experts in the areas of supporting young adults of transition age. Gwen and I will be presenting some systems collaboration work to you initially, and then we will be joined by two community experts with us for an interview in the second portion of our webinar. Alice and Lauren, would you be willing to jump on and introduce yourselves now so we start learning your voices?
Sure. This is
Sure,
Alice.
absolutely. Go ahead, Alice. My name's Lauren Grimes. I work with Honorone of Maryland, which is a statewide education and advocacy organization, or as other of you might know it, a peer or consumer organization. But we have a distinct young adult arm to that organization, which we'll be kind of highlighting in today's webinar.
And I'm Alice Preble. I am from Maine. I have done a lot of work with federal grants for the state of Maine. I was the operations coordinator for a Healthy Transition Initiative, which started in 2009 and ended in 2016. And up until our program, our Now is the Time Healthy Transition program ended for the state of Maine, I was the state project director for that. So I've had some key roles in state grants, and I have experience working within the state system.
Awesome. Alice and Lauren, we're so glad you're here with us, and I can't wait to hear more about each of your areas of work. So today, just so you guys know how we're going to spend our time, we're going to offer a brief overview of cross-systems collaboration efforts, all directed to improve policy and services for young adults of transition age. We're going to spend some time in a discussion period of the thought work questions proposed during today's session and provided to you when you registered or after you registered, and make sure that we let you know about the resources that are available. And then we'll spend the remainder of our time with a community focus, hearing from Alice and Lauren. And with that, let's get started. Gwen, I'll pass to you to begin the presentation.
Thank you. And my connection was just lost, so maybe I'm going to be telling you when to change the slides, Johanna. Oh,
No
no,
problem.
you're back again. Okay, not new news to any of us in the learning community that young adults with behavioral health challenges have poor outcomes. They experience service gaps and have to navigate multiple systems as they transition to adulthood. And complex efforts to change systems, which we're all about in this group, require having and establishing some key partnerships. You'll see on this you'll see on this graphic, I'm sorry, my slides are in a little different order. You'll see on this graphic that the different partners that are critical in both the adult and child system may not be a surprise to you to see these differences, but we can all use it to think about who may be partnering with currently and who would be required to invite into the work with us. I want to talk a little bit. I'm going to go back, and I think my computer skipped a slide. Okay, Gary, it's frozen. There. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about this graphic today. We know, as I just pointed out, that there are poor outcomes which lead to a greater cost to the system, have greater cross-system impact, and so that's what we think of as the necessity to work together as partners. So a young adult who drops out of service may begin self-medicating, may become homeless, which may lead to survival crimes, which lead to young adults in the criminal justice system. So we all know that sustainable change involves shifts in both policy and practice. We want to decrease policies that interfere with good practices and increase policies that support and enhance practices. And that's where the collaboration piece comes in. Some things to consider is, do the adult and child systems identify this age group and provide specific age services? This is critical to what we call the warm handoff between systems. So here we can look at a set of questions that you can begin to consider in your communities as you're moving along in your work. Johanna, I think it's now you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gwen. So one thing that we've been convening around frequently throughout this learning community is that importance of shifting who we think about working with and who are our partners and key stakeholders when we're working on transition age issues. And I think the graphic, Gwen, that you showed earlier is a very telling graphic that for those of us that have done work primarily supporting services and the system in the children's world need to invite new partners to the table as we realize the young people we support may be transitioning into new systems in the adult world that did or did not exist for us. That connection of juvenile justice versus the adult criminal system. We may not necessarily already have key partnerships with all of the individuals that we need to make this systems transformation happen. And so what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes is specifically strategies to work on collaboration. And to start that conversation, I'm going to share with you this spectrum of partnerships that exist. So as you look at the slide today, this is really highlighting a variety of partnerships and ways we can partner. On the left-hand side of the spectrum, we see things about coexisting. We know of each other. We understand the services and supports that are available, and we may refer or talk about each other's work, but we're not mutually working on something together. We coexist. As we move the needle on increasing and deepening what partnership might look like, we may choose to have communication partners, right? We may exist as two different systems who are not only aware of each other's work, but we regularly refer, share information and resources. This can be incredibly important, right? Both in the practice level that Gwen introduced, as well as in policy conversations. As we move further and into deepening partnership, we may have partners that we coordinate with, right? So we're aware, we understand each other's work, we know how to resource, to share resources, and that we also are able to coordinate our efforts. We're able to be at the same table to put our puzzle pieces together and make something move forward together. What we know needs to happen for this true systems transformation, especially in this new space for young adults of transition age, is the deepest level of partnership and of collaboration. And I always find that it's really nice to say that we collaborate, and in practice, much more challenging to do. So one of the things that we did in thought work questions for you today and through our interviews is to think about what does true collaboration look like and what are those components that make a successful recipe for collaboration. So when we collaborate, we are aware of each other's work, we share our information, we refer to each other, we understand and are able to work together. We are also able to co-create. We are able to shift both policies as well as practice. And we share not only resources, but ownership in the work that we do. And so when we think about who is currently a part of our conversation within our state or local community or tribe working on transition issues, do we look around that table and is there a sense of shared ownership in the change effort that we're a part of? And if that isn't a universal yes, that we all own the importance of this work and the work that we're doing, then we may have work in front of us to build and to truly collaborate. I'm going to spend just a couple more minutes talking about this idea of true collaboration. So within systems, there are three distinct voices or groups of stakeholders that exist and potentially conflict in what their driving mission is. So those of the individual member, right, the community, the partner organizations, and the community. When those voices are in conflict, it is hard to move forward with collaboration with any amount of confidence. Individuals, this is when we act as individuals rather than as a team, right? When we're in a form of collaboration where we are not in sync, each individual partner may do an individual piece of work to recruit, to determine what we're doing, to influence and convince people that their work and what they're proposing is really important, right? We end up in a potential situation where we have distrust and we're not all driving together. So if that's not what we want to build, right, a table of people sort of pulling in multiple directions driven by their own missions and purposes, but rather a cohesive table where we are collectively moving forward in collaboration, what do we have to do? So in order to truly shift a system, we have to work together, moving in the same direction, and that starts on a platform of shared values. So in our systems change work, we do need leadership to rise. And so there needs to be a core nucleus that serves as the leadership that creates and aligns the distinct voices into a shared mission and identifies a shared values base. And that leadership role is important in the beginning and then needs to continue, that champion leadership voice needs to continue to provide guidance and to hold all partners in the collaboration accountable to the work that we're doing. But we need more than just a core nucleus of leadership and a shared values. We also need the individuals who move programs and practices forward on a day-to-day basis. When we joined the call and we asked who was here, we have a broad breadth of individuals who serve many different roles within communities, and we all care about supporting young adults transitioning into successful adulthood. Each of us has a role in this collaboration effort within our own communities. And it's important to note that it's not just high-level policy that shifts to support this population. Folks that are in the day-to-day are service providers, folks that are in provider agencies have to do their work differently in order to effectively support young adults. And then the third group that we really need to ensure that is at the table and apart from the beginning of identifying a shared value space and moving on is that of our community, our stakeholders, and our partners. So we cannot do this just as service providers. We need to do this with everyone who's affected and can affect positive change in the lives of young adults. This has been an ongoing theme, and I'll probably say it 3 more times today, but we need to ensure that we have young adult voice and voices of lived experience from the beginning of our work. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what does effective collaboration look like in practice and what we need to do. And I will shift to Gwen to go over that content, and then we're going to dive into some discussion questions with all of you.
Thank you, Johanna. So effective collaboration involves some very fundamental things that you can see listed here. But I think a really critical thing is, as you're approaching partners and working with partners, what is the value added for each system in the work that is being done and collaborating together? What is the win-win? And how do you incorporate, as Johanna said, the recipients of service voice in everything you do? So some very critical things that have to be discussed right up front are language differences. What does family involvement mean to each system? What does young adult voice mean to each system? A role definition of who's in charge of services in the criminal justice system as opposed to the mental health system, and where is there overlap? What about information sharing? Are the systems willing to share paperwork, data, phone lists, even organizational charts? And community safety, which is a major value and driving force in the criminal justice system. How does that play into mental health safety plans and all of the different community safety in terms of child welfare? And then that maintaining investment from stakeholders. How are we, each system together, collaborating to make sure that there's the voice of recipients of service? And then Johanna very nicely mentioned this, but what's the shared value base? So I wasn't very strength-based in that. I started out with looking at what the differences are, but the win-win is very much coming from that shared value base around collaborating for better outcomes for young adults. So as Johanna indicated, we did send out some thought work early on. Johanna is teaching me to use the term thought work as opposed to homework. And we are very interested in what some of your thoughts are around this, and please use the chat function. But we're curious, does your community currently have any cross-system collaborative entities that are focusing on young adults? And you can, oh yay, Candy's typing right away. We appreciate your jumping right in there. And along with this, sort of what makes up the structure of what you are doing. We're going to hear from Alice and Lauren about this, but we're very curious about those of you who are on the part of our community at this point. Oh, I see multiple attendees are typing. Madeline says that they have representatives at the table, but all of us, I think, are in this situation trying to implement collaboration, as we've just talked about what true collaboration is. Hi, Heidi. Heidi's from Massachusetts, and they have a TAY coalition through the Children's League, but she is indicating that that young adult voice has been a challenge. Thanks for being honest about that, Heidi, because I think that's probably true for many of us, or most of us, on the phone. And we are going to talk more about in our discussion time. what some of the issues are around that. Candy, you're in your first year, and so it's a new ball game for you. Working with schools, that's great. And that's one of the partners that is clearly on the left side of that chart between the adult system and the child system. And many times people bring up that schools are hard partners to get to the table. So that is great. Interesting rural issues. Oh, so it's hard to get the young adults there in person. I'm curious, and maybe you can type if anybody has any suggestions about how to use virtual ways of bringing people in. Oh, I see that Candy's also from a rural. Oh, Y-Link, that's very interesting. So the use of virtual ways of including young adult voice. So we've heard from some people who are early in their experience. What about those who have been doing this for a while? Are there ways to assure that the collaboration moves forward and is sustained?
And Gwen, I'm curious, as many are chiming in here, is
Yeah.
the collaborative entity that's working on these issues a new table just focused on young adults of transition age, or are you leveraging some sort of entity or established collaborative to focus on this concept?
I'm nodding my head. You just can't see that, Johanna.
I appreciate it.
That's a great question. And then I'm going to jump to Heidi, who has said that they have been using video links. Another thing I'm curious about, Johanna, is are there multi-system partners in these grant hosted collaboratives? And Candy, I now see that you are also using phone and video options. That I know that in rural areas is also dependent on people having cell service or the ability to use some of those things. Pennsylvania has a state team where young adults are represented.
Oh, Heidi, thank you for sharing. So in Massachusetts, there's a youth development committee that is 12 years old. I hope there was a 10-year birthday party.
And there was a birthday party. I know that there was.
I love it. And a state advisory council that's also 10 years old, and that those entities predate the SAMHSA grants focused on this. So I think that's really interesting for folks to consider, because sometimes there is partnership to build on, right, about these issues, and then we've definitely worked with communities who have needed to create new space.
Mm-hmm. And we'll see, I see here, Johanna, that Ming from Utah, that they have a cross system. This is a collaborative, so you can see child welfare, juvenile justice, mental health, and substance abuse and disability systems use a common engagement survey. So that's a collaborative effort to get information. Well, we appreciate your being a part of this Think with Us think tank. We, as you know, have been sending out these thought work discussion items, and I also think they're very good questions to bring back to your communication entities. Do you see other things important to point out, Johanna? I'm
so happily impressed with the commitment again and again of folks sharing that there is young adult voice and family voice on these collaborative partnerships, and acknowledging that that does not come without challenges. The commitment being there is such a key component to being successful in that area.
And we see Colorado has a long-standing, since 2005, system collaborative. I'd be curious, Deborah, how that has continued and how it is sustained financially in your budget. But that's really exciting.
Madeline, thank you for sharing. So not only there being a statewide structure in Indiana that has youth voice, but also having local boards that are able to focus on county issues. I love it. So lots of you are sharing about the fact that you convene and who is convening and where, at sort of what level you're convening. Are there specific efforts that you've seen success in these collaborative entities in making change or moving forward policy efforts that are important to young adults of transition age? With each new question, Gwen, we have to have more time to chat.
Yeah.
For folks to type.
Do. Well, and at the same time, barriers. I think we've identified barriers in terms of, it hasn't come up time of the meeting, but that is all very often a barrier that is identified in terms of including young adults. Including state-level agencies, that's wonderful. That's that collaboration of multiple systems.
I think something that's important, sort of in reading many of these comments, for those of you that are sharing that there is a collaboration table that has been long-standing, and particularly standing longer or despite or not prevented by having a grant initiative that's focused on this topic, that exists in so many states is inspiring for those of us who may be maximizing a grant opportunity to build such a table. And could it challenge us to think about how we are building collaborative partnerships that will do good, impactful work for a much longer time than the scope of a grant?
Back to the good work in schools. They have a therapist in the schools, which is a great way to share staff and systems to interface. Well, shall we move on, Johanna?
We can, but I would really encourage folks to continue to share.
Please.
Just please do, yeah. I mean, it's one of the things that participants of the learning communities really value is being able to hear from each other. And it's not a bad idea to say the state or community you represent as you're chiming in again, so we can know how to find you for follow-up for those that have additional curiosity questions.
And we will find you.
Yeah. All right, cool. So I'm going to continue our conversation about collaboration and working together in partnerships and specifically across child and adult serving systems to improve outcomes for young adults of transition age. So offering today a way to organize the work, especially in the beginning, and what do we do first. And so providing a flow today for you guys to consider and apply at home is to start with the identification and building of a sense of urgency around this specific population. And really during this stage, building the justification of why work is needed specific to young adults. Moving then into a phase of collaboration, which is today's theme, if you can't tell. Convening partners to do all of the work that you guys have been sharing here, and we'll hear from Alice and Lauren. And then moving into a stage of making commitment, and how do we formalize partnerships through these commitments. And to me, this is a really important part of the legacy of partnership work. Especially for those of us that are from system of care and healthy transition grantees on today's session. So this slide provides an overview of why this organizational method makes sense and introduces each of these stages to you. And I'll go into a little more detail in each of these areas. All right, so establishing a sense of urgency. What are the leverage points that can help us build this sense of urgency? And while we are creating urgency, a sense of urgency, it's important for us to establish the multiple levers we have at our disposal, knowing that each new partner and stakeholder we invite to the table may need a different lever pressed, so to say, to have them join you in this sense of urgency. I like to, pause for a moment and think about who can help us establish this why behind the work that we're doing. And a theme throughout the learning series and throughout all of your daily work, as you're highlighting by your examples, is that the voices of lived experience, which can be presented and perspective shared in connection with the important and challenging data that we have about this age group and this population. We shouldn't underestimate the power of youth voice in all of the systems change work that we do. While we are establishing urgency across our partners, we'll be called upon to provide education and build a common foundation of understanding of why we are focusing specifically on improving transition. And I think that both of the TA centers have done an in-depth job of helping us explore the multitude of challenges that young adults face, and each of your communities is actively working on practical strategies and policy change to change those outcomes. So the reason that we would spend a good amount of time in establishing the urgency and confirming that we have a mutually shared understanding of why that we do this work is that this will allow us to move forward future collaboration based on a shared value. As we move from a time period in the beginning of establishing this urgency, we move into the phase of collaboration. And I love putting this on one slide as just like, we will collaborate together. But we've already started to explore the nuances that this requires. So why would we do this work if we know it's going to be challenging, right? I would argue that because when we collaborate, this deepest sense of partnership, we are able to make win-win situations for everyone that is involved. And this can be a complicated discussion to have initially between children and adult systems, but it is achievable to see that work with this population and improve transition outcomes for young adults will be and provide a win-win outcome for everyone. As we've been talking about collaboration, I'd note that we need to ensure that there are a broad array of voices and experiences at this table beyond just those that work in leadership roles within the various systems. We want to make sure that those system leaders are there, but are also very focused on making sure that both traditional and non-traditional service providers are present. I've seen some of that occurring in your communities via the chat box. And that we have a very valuable and important voice of lived experience at the table, including youth voice, representation from youth-driven organizations, caregiver and family perspectives, individuals from family-run organizations, and remembering that in this important work that consumer-run organizations from our adult systems are important, valuable partners in this work. So as we figure out how to collaborate with each other and we move forward with a willingness to work from our shared values base, we need to figure out how to make commitments to each other. And commitments are important to formalizing relationships and holding ourselves accountable. So as we think about commitments, we can think about this in a very action-oriented way. So what needs to happen to make change happen? This can be thought about, I think, in two important buckets. One is, what needs to shift or be added for seamless transitions at the local service level within agencies. Do we need improved communication pathways? Do we need to explore and add a new practice model with a selective intervention that is shown to be effective for this population? Do we currently have the level of youth engagement that we would like and youth voice at the table at this local level? Do we need to build or enhance or invest in the development of youth and family peer support? These are all examples of things that we may need to do to move this work forward. Then the question becomes, what form of commitment can partners make to each other in order to hold each other accountable for this change? This same identification of what needs to shift needs to happen at the state or at the policy level, where we might say that we really need to identify a team of people who are looking to this cross-systems work. We may need to be looking at the eligibility criteria for young adults to receive services in the children's system, and will they be eligible or will they not be eligible but still have a high level of need as they turn 18, 21, 25, depending on our system's engagement. If that's a need for us to focus on, then we need to develop a commitment form that matches that type of action step. So this commitment can look like any number of things, and we've seen a broad array of successful examples. But there can be the establishment of memorandums of understanding. Some of you may be receiving grant funding that comes with requirements for certain MOUs to be in place as a lever of commitment to move collaboration forward. Commitment may look like establishing agreed upon communication strategies and pathways across the multiple partners that are in the collaborative entity. It may include planning together and committing to actions together. So whatever commitment ends up looking like for you, the formalization of that and the agreement on behalf of partners is incredibly important. So one thing that we've been frequently offering to participants in this learning community is really questions to take back to your team for discussion and further consideration. So I'm going to leave you with these 3 policy consideration questions for you to take home with you and to hold with you as we hear from Alice and Lauren. We're going to be transitioning in a moment to a talk show format, and Gwen is going to facilitate us in a conversation so we can learn from experiences in Maryland and Maine. And while we do that, yes.
I was just going to jump in and say on the chat, we have 2 outstanding questions that we're looking for information on. Crystal from Pennsylvania has brought up, what about when key decision makers aren't at the table? And how do you get information back to and influence the people who are making decisions? And this is sort of tied in with Stephanie from Michigan, who's interested about how communities have been addressing state policy barriers, such as in other systems too, such as criminal justice, when 17-year-olds are being moved to adult So we'll move into the talk show, but there are two outstanding questions from your peers there that we hope people will begin to address and think about.
Great. Gwen, thank you so much for calling our attention to those questions so we can chat some answers back to Crystal and Stephanie, and keep your questions coming.
Yes,
Gwen and Lauren and Alice, I'd love to transition to you guys.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is the three of us, and I'm going to check there we go. So as I've said before, we're very privileged to have Alice and Lauren here as part of our talk show guests. They introduced themselves previously, but I'm going to remind you that Alice has a state perspective from the state of Maine that had both a Healthy Transitions Initiative grant and a Healthy Transition grant. And when I state, she worked in the state, right, Alice, as a state employee. And Marilyn also had an HTI grant and currently has an HT grant, and she's from the perspective of a consumer organization on our own, Maryland. So thank you both, Alice and Lauren, for being here. We're going to talk about your experiences with cross-system collaboration that have focused on and been involved with young adults. So first, I'm curious if you could share with us your strategies that were used to implement or improve cross-system collaboration.
Well, Gwen, I can talk a little bit about what we did in Maine. It was a really frustrating process to start because I was trying to get a group of folks together to kind of look at policy change and look at supports and services, because we did a cross-site kind of grid, and we looked at every single law or policy at the state level for young people, and each different department, whether it's the Department of Education, Corrections, Labor, Health and Human Services, the ages for different programs were different across the spectrum. So we tried to get a group of folks together from each of those departments to really look at how can we make it more consistent and a more seamless process for young people as they transition to adulthood. And it was really frustrating to begin with because I did a lot of emailing and a lot of phone calling, and people wouldn't respond. So I started offering times that I could come and meet, and it really helped to have the face-to-face contact with folks so they could know who I was, what I was trying to do, and we ended up getting folks at the table from Department of Health and Human Services, both adult and children, Department of Corrections, both adult and children, Department of Education, although that was a little more challenging. That has always been a challenge, at least in the state of Maine. We didn't get the leadership, but we got an appointed person. And we had the Department of Labor at the table, and we ended up developing a policy for persons of transition age with those folks around the table. We also had youth and young adults. We had family. We had some schools, service providers, and developed that. And because in the state of Maine, in order to have policy go through, it has to go through a legislative process, which would have taken a very long time. It was decided that we put it in a memorandum of understanding and have that shared between the four departments, Department of Health and Human Services, Corrections, Labor, and Education. So I think having that face-to-face and really talking about what's in it for them and how it can benefit the young people in their service area.
So when you say we, Alice, you're referring to this group, system-level collaborative group that was looking at policies for this age group.
Yes, but when I say we as it relates to the Memorandum of Understanding, it was the Department of Health and Human Services. We had to get approval from our commissioner and then to present it to other commissioners for their approval.
Thank you. And Lauren, I know you've done a lot with policy change in Maryland.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the most significant project that we'll I think provide the best example for our participants is Maryland worked on a What Helps What Harms project, which Youth Move National actually did a larger national version of this, and Maryland took up that call, and Honorine of Maryland, the organization I work for. And we looked at kind of initializing this project because we had a really select group of young people who were incredible advocates, but we wanted to really look at opportunities to expand the number of young people who were involved in advocacy, who were involved in discussing some of the things about their service systems that were affecting them. So we conducted a series of focus groups with young people 18 to 29 years old, served in a number of different settings across Maryland. Some of them were alternative schools, some of them were wellness and recovery centers, some of them were psychiatric rehab programs or recovery houses where young people were being served. And we conducted focus groups that really looked at what were the things within the services and systems that these young people had been involved in that helped them, that harmed them, that threw up barriers in front of them, and what would they have chosen to have set up differently. And over the course of that year, we kind of compiled some of the themes that we were hearing from young people in a very cross-system setting, and put together and published a report that came out in February of 2016. And that report has now been used to provide some intensive training around what young people in Maryland are looking for from their services and from their systems. We've actually trained some of our young adult advocates who were involved in the focus group process to train providers on some of these themes. We've been able to set up some of the young adults who participated in the focus groups on task forces. One of the things that came out of the legislative session this past session was a seclusion and restraint task force to really look at how we reduce and eliminate seclusion and restraint in schools. And one of the young people who participated in the What Helps What Harms focus groups spoke a lot about this and how it had impacted her life. And we connected her with that task force, and she now sits on that as an advocate to kind of inform the policies and protocol that are being developed currently around that.
So I heard you say a couple of things, Lauren, I think that are important, and that is that you use focus groups to get information from a much larger group of young adults than if you were just going with volunteers coming to meetings or things like that. And then that information that you had, you were able to use to begin to impact some very critical service delivery areas. Well, has the state been open to that? And what has your communication pathway been?
We were really fortunate right from the beginning that the Behavioral Health Administration of Maryland, which is this state entity, was deeply supportive of this project and connected us to a lot of important partners and supported us in trying to move this forward. But I want to highlight one of the other kind of important things there is one of the reasons that we looked at this was we did want the voices of a larger group of young people to be involved. Like I said, we had kind of a handful of great young advocates, but one of the things that I know I saw in the chat box people struggle with is just getting young people to the table. So what we found in doing the What Helps What Harms project is we were going to the settings where they are over the course of a long period of time, and it enabled us to kind of build a foundation of young people that, you know, maybe we didn't talk to them for 6 months or 3 months, but they were consistently in touch with us, and we were able to connect them to opportunities that were of interest to them, and we had this large group of young people to pull from. Almost 100 of them participated in that project.
Alice, I think I remember, because I was involved with Maine, or privileged to be involved with Maine when you were doing some of this work, that you were able to get a large number of young adults to the table with high-level system partners. Do Any ideas on how that you were able to do that? And you're fairly rural. I know you have issues around transportation.
Well, and I think, well, a couple of different things. We knew of some young adult champions who really were passionate about making change, and asked them to come to the table from different areas. There were some from who had been involved in special education through school, the foster care system, the criminal justice system, mental health system. So we had young people from representing many different areas, but what we also realize is their time is valuable, and it's very hard to get folks to the table. So we would arrange rides for them with folks that might have been coming from their area, or some people would come and get them to ensure that they were at the table, and provide a stipend for them. We had young people who saw it, because what happened was once the policy was written and it went into turning it into an MOU, there was a period of time when that group didn't meet anymore. And the young people who had been meeting were reaching out saying, well, we won't take a stipend, we'll just come, because they were so excited about the work that was happening. And we just had to explain to them that it was just on hold until we could get the MOU developed. And then we brought them back together to ensure that we didn't lose anything from bringing it to the policy to converting it into an MOU for their input.
That was really critical for them, that they could see where their information went. Lauren, has there been a way you've been able to get back to those who were in the focus group to let them know that their information was used to impact the lives of other young adults? Or
yeah, each focus group, we got the contact information, as long as they were willing to give it to us, of each young person that was involved in those focus groups. And when that report was published, we sent them a printed copy with a note just saying, this is incredible work, and we're going to be looking to push a lot of the priorities that you guys brought up in a number of different ways. And that's how we've gotten we've recruited some young people to sit on committees. We've recruited some young people to be able to actually train around some of the themes of the project. And I'll be honest, both myself and the young lady who was our TAKE coordinator for the past 2 years keeps in touch with people a lot through Facebook. Even if it's just a 3-minute chat here and there, if you haven't talked to somebody who was really interested and wanted to be involved, just keeping that line of communication open has been really successful for us.
So the use of communication of vehicles that are available that are young adult friendly.
Absolutely.
Finding out what works for them. Alice, you look like you're going to say something.
Yes, I agree with that. I still have young people who are part of the program reaching out to me asking how they can become involved in their communities, or if I know anything that's going on. And I don't work in the HT work anymore, so I still hear from them.
Mm-hmm. What about people on the local level influencing, collaboratively influencing what's going on? I know Stephanie in the chat box is saying they're a local grant. How can we influence state policy? And Alice, I think you were local initially, and you're certainly sitting in local communities, Lauren. Any ideas about that?
Well, for me, it's a matter of who's your audience and what's in it for them. In presenting and trying to get their participation, how will the work that you're doing or what you're trying to do benefit them and the population or the youth and young adults in which they're interacting with? That worked very well for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think the concept of the What Helps What Harms project has been done nationally. It's been done on a statewide basis, and it's been done in local communities. In fact, one of the things that we've done a lot of training on in Maryland when we present on the What Helps What Harms project is with providers, really asking them, how can you replicate this process within your small provider organization so that you are getting ongoing and consistent feedback from young people about when there is a policy shift or when you're thinking about a policy shift, how that is going to impact them and how they can be a part of that if they so choose. So I think thinking about that format can be as small or as large as you need it to be.
So consistently getting information on a local, a regional, and a state level, but then using that information to say this is what we are hearing from those young adults who are directly impacted by this.
And I think, too, Gwen, an important thing, if you're at the local level, my experience has been, and I don't know about other states, but my experience in Maine has been, when I worked at the local level, if I wanted anyone at the state level to look at anything or to listen to what I was saying, I had to show data, and I had to show how the work we were doing was impacting the community and the youth and young adults in that community.
And I think that's what you were doing with your focus groups, right, Lauren? Getting data, information.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, I want to reiterate that one of the things that we have trained provider organizations around is, for instance, we talked to an organization that had made a policy shift regarding who picks up prescriptions for their young adult program. And they made a large sweeping policy shift that all staff were going to pick up all prescriptions for the young people involved in this program. But what they didn't realize, and they were not ill-willed in this, but what they didn't realize was that a number of the young people in that program, it was the one thing that they felt like they had independence around. They could drive to pick up their own prescription. It's small changes like that we as providers don't necessarily think are going to be earth-shattering for a young person, can really pull the rug out from under them. And the process of getting ongoing, consistent feedback from young people is important to avoid things like that.
So I'm curious about what you see as some of the collaborative barriers that you've obviously been very successful, but what were some of the challenges?
Well, I can speak from my work when it started in 2009. The biggest challenge, and I think what I would really, if I were to give a takeaway, I guess this would be it, is at that point, a lot of providers, a lot of community folks, and even state folks I don't know that they didn't see the value in youth and young adult voice, but it was new, and it was a new concept to have that at the table. And so what would happen is work groups would happen, or work would be starting to happen, and then having youth and young adults at the table would be an afterthought. And, oh, well, we probably should. But in order to really do transparent and good work, it has to have that involvement from the very beginning. And that was a challenge. That was a challenge for folks to really see the value in doing that.
Lauren, thoughts?
Yeah, I completely echo what Alice is saying. When we found the ability, when we kind of cultivated the ability to involve young people in large-scale initiatives, like, for instance, the Seclusion Restraint Task Force that I spoke of earlier, it's been a really big challenge in getting them to give them context, provide a foundation for what their role is there. And we've taken up the reins in that in a lot of ways, which I wish we had gotten to a point where we have done enough training, cross-systems training, where that wouldn't be the role of Honor of Maryland or of any specific young adult that people would have been trained to be able to do this in some sort of young adult competency. And in a lot of ways in the mental health system, that has happened. In other systems, they're a little bit further behind in Maryland. But yeah, I echo what Alice is saying. It's really been a challenge to provide young people the information that they need to feel like they are actually involved, that the work they're doing is worthwhile, and so that they're not lost and disinterested.
And yet, I do know that many of your efforts have led to some system change in service array. Am I correct? Like some drop-in centers, or am I not remembering correctly?
No, they haven't led to specific youth drop-in centers. However, Honor of Maryland, actually my primary role is to oversee 20 wellness and recovery centers that are peer-run programs. And we've done a lot of work with them in creating safe spaces for young people, but also thinking outside the box because they've struggled to get young people to come into the centers. But we've done a lot of work with them around, well, how can we partner with young people on something that they are actually asking for, or on initiatives that they've already taken? How can we support them? So there's been a lot of efforts in training young people using the peers at the Wellness and Recovery Centers on storytelling, on strategic sharing, on partnering on speaking panels and stigma reduction initiatives and things like that.
Alice, were there service delivery changes that came out of the work at the state level?
Some of this, the couple of things come to mind. The state of Maine used the transition to independence process model of case management. And even though when our Healthy Transition project, that now is the time, went away, the state of Maine decided to still utilize that, that model, not the way that we were, but it's being utilized. In the state of Maine, the Office of Child and Family Services, which is the children's side of Department of Health and Human Services, has been doing a lot of work on having like a person-centered planning process, and they've asked me for their help with that, even though I'm not in that program anymore, and I'm more than happy to help in really ensuring that the competencies and the tasks of the TIP model are incorporated into that person-centered planning process. And another thing that comes to mind, Gwen, is when I was the project director for Now is the Time, I was co-located, so I sat at the adult mental health and the Office of Child and Family Services. And getting to know the folks at Substance Abuse Mental Health, which is the adult side, really sharing with them some of the challenges for young adults who turn 18 and are kind of in between the children's system and the adult system. And one of the big things for them was housing. And so really looking at, because in the adult world in Maine, it's a serious mental illness. And in the children's world, it's a serious emotional disturbance. So, and in order to qualify for an adult housing service, you have to have that label of SMI, the serious mental illness. And so really working with them to consider, even though a young adult may be old enough to be in the adult system, if they are still receiving some of the services and supports in the children's system based on their needs, to really reconsider that qualification for housing, because housing was a big thing, and they did make some changes based on that work.
Gwen, I think one of the other things that comes to mind when we're talking about new service arrays is not necessarily new services entirely, but the state of Maryland just recently got, as many states have in light of the opioid epidemic, a large chunk of money to really expand treatment services for opioid addiction, and a large chunk of that money is supposed to be focused on recovery houses. So On Our Own of Maryland and a couple of other young organizations that focus on young adults made the recommendation that some of those recovery houses be created for a young adult specific population, because one of the things that we heard ongoing in our focus groups was that being in recovery around other young people was really helpful, and recovery really looks different when you are 19 versus when you are 49. So that recommendation hasn't gone anywhere because we are still very in the very beginning stages of even kind of creating those services. But those are the types of things that our collaborations with various state entities have kind of brought to fruition.
And a lesson learned is that those in state government to reach out to consumer advocacy groups can be a real tool, and getting that information from them. When the three of us were talking yesterday, we did talk a lot about issues for replication for the other people in our learning community who are listening. And I think I talked at that's always of interest to me. So what can people in other states and communities take back with them? What do you two think are really critical for communities that are trying to influence outcomes in a positive manner? What would you say are the non-negotiables?
For me, Gwen, I shared already one of my biggest takeaways would be, and that is the youth and young adult involvement from the beginning, and an understanding of what is expected of them and what they can expect of other people, so that they come prepared, because they have so much value to add to any of these processes. Because when we're talking about services and supports, it's for them, and I think another thing is if you're trying to engage people at the table, like I said before, it's really important for them to know and see who you are, rather than maybe 4 or 5, 6 emails hoping that they'll respond to this one last one. That communication, her personal communication, is really, really important.
I'm going to go back to the young adult involvement for a second. I think, Lauren, yesterday you described it as assuring that the involvement isn't tokenism.
Yeah, and again, as I said in the very beginning of this, I think that was one of our kind of reasons for pursuing the What Helps What Harms project. Is we had just in our general work, a lot of young people who wanted to be involved in some way, wanted to make a difference, wanted to do a variety of things, but they didn't necessarily want to sit on a committee or speak in front of 300 people, which is where our advocacy efforts kind of were at that point. So we wanted to create a project that really embraced a larger swath of young people and leveraged their voices to make change on higher policy levels.
And then Alice moved to that idea that you said several times that I like, Alice, find the champions. And if you're not finding them immediately, go visit them. Or, as you said, you were sitting in an office situation where you were around those people. And did I get that right? Keep calling until you find the right person.
Yes. Yeah, or show up. Say, hey, I'm going to be in your area this time. I'm going to drop by, and just show up. I've done that too. Mm-hmm. And I think, too, when thinking about youth voice, there are some, and it's just reality, there are some groups or committees, especially at the state level, where sometimes I go in and I don't know what folks are talking about because the language is not my language. Mm-hmm. So it's really important. Language is really important. And also, if it's a group that you know a youth or young adult may not get much out of or have any interest in sitting at, if there's feedback that you want and you have a core group of young people who can have really good input, bring back what you're working on to them and talk about it, and then bring that back to the larger group. I've done that before, too, just because of the flavor of the group. It wasn't necessarily a good use of time, if you know what I mean.
And that's back to Lauren's ideas about focus groups and how do you get that voice right. If it's not necessarily sitting at a table. I think you both mentioned yesterday, too, and you brought this up today, one of you, about understanding the culture of the people you're asking to collaborate with you and that sort of what's in it for them, and then being able to very clearly communicate why you're asking them to be involved.
Right, and know their language, because correction speaks a whole different language than I do.
Do you find that they understand your language?
I've had many teaching moments.
That's good.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but it's always an opportunity for a good conversation.
We have about 10 minutes now. For those of you who aren't on camera and are a part of our learning community, we'd very much like to bring you into the conversation. So start typing, and you have 2 subject matter experts here. we're curious about what you all are thinking. In the meantime, any other non-negotiables you guys can, Alice and Lauren, that you're thinking?
I think one of the that again comes to mind that was that kind of organically came of our Transitional Age Youth Project here was the idea that really let your young adult peers working in your organizations use their specific lived experience to craft where that project goes to. I think very often we, as larger organizations, have our own priority agendas, and we say, these are the things that we're working on. But what we did when we had a new young person come on in our TAE position was really combine the idea of not only her young adultness, which we focus on a lot because we historically as systems have not acknowledged that enough, but also her lived experience was with opioid addiction and medication-assisted treatment. So we took that project really in the direction of looking at quality improvement and peer support in the medication-assisted treatment world. So I think really you can ensure a young person's interest when you've done that, and you can ensure that their expertise is relevant when you allow the priorities of that project or organization to be defined by what has impacted and what is important to that young person.
So a couple things. When you're working with young adults as subject matter expertise, don't just go with their age as their subject matter expertise, that they have different experiences and different systems that could be very critical to the learning of that. And then Alice, to tie into that, your thing of, and don't assume that young adults are going to easily fit into every committee, but taking information to them is critical. So that combination of the environment of the meeting, the expertise of the young adult, and that expertise isn't always age. All young adults aren't the same, just like all old ladies aren't the same.
Hey, who are you talking to?
So we have a comment here from Trish, who's wondering how to get partners on board with utilizing youth voice in decision making, and that's sort of the how do they see the value of young adult voice? Ideas on that, guys?
Well, what I've done in the past when I've struggled, I mean, in the very beginning, had struggles even with folks wanting youth and young adults at the table for anything, is bring some of them to meet with the folks that you're having a hard time engaging, because they say it better than I could say it, you know, and really, depending on what you're, you know, what work you're doing, I think the best way to see value is to meet them, to talk to them, to hear their stories, to hear, you know, what their thoughts are and how we can promote change.
Piggybacking on that, Gwen, I think it's also important to, and this comes back to culture and language too, is to find some middle ground of what the leadership of an organization is really looking for. Or what mode of communication they're going to be receptive to. So usually we have found that when we get a couple of young people, like Alice just said, to come in and chat and talk with an organization on either starting a youth advisory board or whatever the objective is, work ahead of time with those young people to really look at, do we want to use a PowerPoint? Do we want to talk about what we've already done? How do we want to present this to our particular audience? You're really targeting what they're going to get out of this as well, rather than just say, bring young people because we're cool. That's been valuable for us.
I was part of a year-long planning process with young adults who had, I think, heaven help us, every other week meetings, and we found that very valuable. How would you like your information to be shared? Do you want a spokesperson to you this next meeting? Do you want to do a PowerPoint? Do you just want to be listening learners? And I found that very helpful. It does take only staff time to be meeting with the young adults and before and after about how they would like their voice to be heard. We have another. Oh, people panic and zip up when people they have influence over are in the room. What a thought. Do you have thoughts about that? People panic and zip up when the people they have influence over are in the room. Have you experienced that?
So yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong if I'm going off on a tangent and I'm not getting exactly what the question is here. But we deal with that not only with young people, but largely when we're doing training as an advocacy organization in general. We take great pains when we do a training to talk ahead of time to the organization, to some of the consumers of that organization. Do you think it will be valuable or a detriment to have staff, consumers, peers, whatever language you would like to use, in the room together to really discuss collaboration, or are we not there yet? Do we need to create buy-in with a certain demographic and then bring people together to the table? So really figuring out where the organization or whatever entity you're talking about is and where their conflicts have existed prior to going in there is helpful in how you craft a message and how you enable people to be able to say their truth at that table.
Right, and I second that many, many times because I think folks need to feel safe in saying what they feel or what they think.
So I sort of missed the boat when I said be sure you have the pre-meeting with the young adults. I'm hearing you both say have the pre-meeting with the organization or the group that are the non-young adults at meetings.
Yeah, I think that pre-work is very important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you're getting agreement from that, around that. So I think that's about it. Any one last word or sentence, Alice and Lauren?
Oh God, that's a lot of pressure.
Or you could say no comment. That's fine.
Well,
okay.
I guess.
Go ahead, Alice.
Okay, I guess what I would say is even with all the frustration and the work that it takes to open up some of these relationships and communications, keep trying because eventually it will happen. And trust me, I thought at times it was never going to happen. But just being persistent, finding the right people who you can make connections with and really keeping that communication and being honest and transparent. Thank you, Alice. Lauren?
I was going to say something very similar. Just persistence is really key. I hear consistently when I talk with organizations about youth involvement, they're like, oh, but they'll come once and then they're not interested, or we can't, keep their interest, or we can't get them here, or I was speaking with someone recently about doing things right, i.e. around IEPs. And they were like, I'm doing all of the things that you're saying are authentic and organic and really respecting this young person's voice, and they still don't trust me. And I think we have to remember that even when we are set up to be doing everything right, historically, most likely that young person has gone through 1,000 people who were doing it wrong and not respecting their voice. And they've got to get past that in order to be able to accept your respect and your interest in their opinion. And that takes time.
That's great. Thank you both very much. So I'm tasked with reminding our learning community of what the commitment was we asked. Please We have one more meeting. I think it's probably on the next slide in September. We like it when you're a part of the discussion and the interactions. Please use the thought work questions before and after the time we're together, and we may be calling on you to be a presenter. We're always open to have you sharing of resources, ideas, and opportunities. There it is. Our next call is September 12th, and we're going to be very, very privileged to have Dr. Mary Ann Davis with us, and she's going to dig deeper into the partnerships that are critical in adult services and supports. She's done a lot of work with criminal justice and with housing and with employment, and so that will be the emphasis of our September call on the 12th of September. And Johanna, there we go, polling questions. Do we have those? Please take a minute to do these before you leave. This does inform how we will organize ourselves for September.
Thank you, Alice and Lauren, for sharing all of your insight today. It was so wonderful to hear about your experiences and learn with you. And Gwen, thanks for co-facilitating again.
You're welcome, Johanna. Always fun.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.